Hey guys, I'm Emily from the Blue Mouse, and today I'm going to show you how to knit the Honeycomb Brioche stitch. To get started, you'll just need to cast on a multiple of 2 stitches, and you'll be working a 4-row repeat. Alright, so you're going to want to do at least 1 setup row. So really, your setup row, you want to end up with some form of stockinette on your right side row. You're going to be working a knit one below repeat, so you need to have a knit stitch to be able to work below. So I'll show you how to do that. So you knit the first stitch normally, and now you're going to knit 1 below. This is the loop that you would normally be going into, but instead you're going to go into the hole below it. So you can kind of tell that there is a small hole below your stitch right here. That is what you're going to go into. So you go into the hole below your loop, go into it, and then you're just going to knit. So yarn over and pull that through, and then slide off, and then you just knit the next one normally. And then you just go into the stitch below the next one. So this hole here below, that is your stitch from the previous row. You go into it, yarn over and pull through. Then you knit the next one normally. And now you're going to go into the next one below. So go into that loop below it, yarn over and pull through, and you're just going to repeat that to the end of your row. It's a little bit tricky on your last stitch, but you can still kind of make out the V shape of the stitch below. Go between it into that gap, yarn over and pull through. Now I end up with this really large loop here. We're going to even that out on the next row. So the second row, you're going to work what's called a knit with a slip, and then a regular knit stitch, and then you're going to repeat that to the end of your row. So it's a little bit hard to see on these first few rows. So maybe once you've worked around 10 to 15 rows, this will be a lot easier. So every row you're going to be knitting, so you keep your yarn in the back. So you go into this little loop here as if to knit, and slip it to your right hand needle, and then you go into the actual stitch and slip it as if to knit. So now you have 2 loops on your right hand needle. So you take your left hand needle and you go into those 2 loops and come out towards the front. So you've sort of crisscrossed your needles here, created sort of an X. So you're just going to yarn over your right hand needle and pull that yarn over through both loops. So you're essentially knitting these 2 loops together, and then you can pull them off your left hand needle. And then you're going to knit the next stitch normally. Now that you're actually in your row and you're not just starting out on the first stitch, it's a little bit easier. So here's my next stitch right here. And just below it, where the yarn is wrapped around it, you can tell that there's 2 strands of yarn wrapped around it. So can you see that there's 1 loop here, and then there's another loop up here? There's 2 strands wrapped around this, because this is your knit 1 below from the last row. So you have these 2 strands here, one that's closer to your stitch and one that's closer to the bottom. The one that's closer to your stitch is what you're going to go into. Take your needle, go into the top one as if to knit, and now you're going to slip your actual stitch as if to knit as well. So now you have these 2 loops on your right hand needle. You go into both of them with your left hand needle like this, creating a crisscross, and then you're going to essentially just knit them together. So yarn over and pull through, and now you're going to knit the next one normally. Now we come back to our knit with a slip. This one's a little bit easier to see because the top strand of yarn is already a little bit loose, so you pick that one up and then you slip the actual stitch as if to knit. Take your left hand needle into both of them, yarn over and knit them together. Knit the next stitch normally, and you just repeat that to the end of your row. Then you turn your work and begin working row 3. So this is a knit 1 below, knit 1 repeat. So we start out by going into the stitch below your first one. So this right here is the loop that would make up the stitch. You go into the hole below it, yarn over and pull through, knit 1 normally, knit 1 below, so you go into the hole below it and knit it, knit 1 normally, go into the hole below it, knit 1 normally, and you just repeat that to the end of your row. turn your work, and remember to keep the yarn in the back. And we're going to repeat one knit stitch followed by a knit with a slip. So knit the first stitch normally. And this is where it starts to get a little bit easier. So if you turn your work to look at the front, just so I can show you which loop you're going to go into. So there's 2 strands that kind of loop around your knit stitch and come out in the front on either side. So they're right here. If you pull on one, it tightens up the other side, and vice versa. And that's how you know which one you're working with is right. So you have the actual column of knit stitches here. You've got the loop and the one below it. These are not a part of your knit stitch. They're just kind of extra loops that just hang there. So you're going to be going into the loop that is closest to your knit stitch, and it's also in the opening between your 2 needles. So this is what it looks like from the front side, and now I'll show it to you from the side that you're actually working on. So you can kind of tell from the back, because you've got 2 loops here. This is the bottom one, is the one that's attached to your actual knit stitch, and the top one is not attached. It just kind of loops behind it. This is the knit one below stitch that you work. So when you knit one below, it pulls that stitch down and it creates an extra loop. So the way you can tell these 2 apart is that when you pull on this one, you can tell that it's not attached to your knit stitch. It doesn't pull your knit stitch any tighter, and it doesn't make the stitch below it any tighter. When you pull on it, it doesn't tighten up any of your actual knit stitches. So that is the right one. So you go into that one and pick it up and put it on your right hand needle, and then you slip the next stitch as if to knit. Then you take your left hand needle into both those stitches, yarn over and pull through, knit the next stitch normally, and now we've come to our next knit with a slip stitch. So again, you've got 2 loops here right behind your stitch. You can kind of tell that there's a loop here. There's a loop in between them that you're picking up, and you know it's the right loop when it picks up the second loop from behind your knit stitch. So I hope that makes sense. So there's several loops in between your needles. You can pick up the top one, which is also the top loop right behind your knit stitch. So you pick that one up, you slip the actual stitch as if to knit, go into both with your left hand needle, yarn over and pull through, then knit the next stitch normally. So again, there's a couple ways that you can figure out which is the right stitch. So there's a loop between your 2 needles here. It's this loop right here, and you can tell that it's the right one because when you lift it up a little bit, it lifts up the top loop behind your knit stitch. So it's attached to that. There's a different loop below that pulls your knit stitch tight. It's not that one. It's the top one that when you pull it, it doesn't tighten up your knit stitch at all. So you go pick that one up from the front to the back, then slip your stitch as if to knit, go into both and knit them together, and you just repeat that to the end of your row, and then you just repeat those 4 rows until you have your desired length.